What are the four phases of retirement? I'm going to tell you it is crucial that you know what they are so that you can navigate all the way through them in the smoothest possible way. Listen to this episode.
To learn more about how to secure your retirement and all the different elements you need to know, please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you'll be notified when we release episodes every Monday. We have helped hundreds of our clients gain clarity and get on the path to a great retirement. Now it's your turn. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Secure Your Retirement. We are very happy to have a special guest today. I actually heard about him and heard him being interviewed about a book that he wrote that fits so perfectly with what we do. And I just wanted to make sure that we could maybe have him come on and talk to you as well. But it's Riley Moynes, and he is the author of the book, The Four Phases of Retirement. And so thank you very much, Riley, for coming on and talking with us today.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to share.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what intrigued me so much, Riley, and the reason why I wanted to have you on is I've been doing this for 24 years now, and I have pretty much the whole entire time worked with individuals that are about 10 years out from retirement into and then through retirement. And when I saw this, the four phases of retirement, and I heard you talk about those phases, I said, man, I see that all the time. These four phases. And sometimes we're talking to people. I always think about it and say, one of the most emotional hurdles is to go from decades of work to now I'm not going to work. And then how is that going to play out? And I just thought the way you explained it, I've lived it and lived it with my clients. And I just thought, man, this is so good. So could you do this first, just before we go in and start breaking it down? Could you give us a little bit of background about you and then what made you write this book, and so we kind of understand who we're talking to?
Right. Well, I spent a number of years as you were doing as a financial advisor, a wealth manager, and I did a lot of retirement preparation with my clients as well. But I have to say that it didn't hit me until I stepped back from the day-to-day operations of our business, and I experienced these four phases, but I didn't know about them at the time. I was, technically retired, I guess you'd say. I was busy enough. I didn't really feel that I was doing anything that was particularly meaningful or significant or important. And I really began to try to figure out what was going on, and it was a very personal kind of a quest. So I read the research, and of course, as you know very well, most of the research relates to preparation for retirement from a financial point of view or from an estate point of view, wills, powers of attorney, all that kind of stuff. Investment portfolios and balances and so on. And they're all critically important, but it just wasn't what I was looking for. So I decided then, my background is in some research. And so I decided, well, I better talk to people and see if they can help me. And I was directed to a number of people who I was told had kind of figured out retirement, whatever that means. And so I approached them, and I had a series of questions that I put to them. I always finished up by my final question was always, how do you squeeze all the juice out of retirement? And so one thing led to another, and so people that I interviewed would say, well, you should talk to so and so and so and so, and it went on for over 3 years. Well over 150, closer to 200 interviews. And then I had this mass of information that I had to try to make sense of. That was the next challenge. My background before I became involved in financial services was as a teacher. And one of the things I had learned early on as a teacher is that if you could help kids, people, students of whatever age, kind of make sense of something, if you could provide some sort of a framework within which things made more sense than they might have otherwise, that was really helpful. And it was always helpful to me. And so I then started to look for what kind of patterns, what kind of big picture framework could there be that would help make sense of this. And that's how the four phases evolved. And as I then kind of field tested them, does this make sense? I went back to a number of the interviewees. Does this make sense? Overwhelmingly, they said absolutely. And as I began to apply it, certainly to my own situation and others that I interviewed, it always seems to kind of make big time sense for them.
Oh, hold on one second, Merce. We don't hear you for some reason. So I've got Merce. We're in different locations today, and so he. I'm going to have to go ahead and we'll kind of get this started and see where his sound comes in here in a second.
Okay.
But the thing that I wanted to ask is that we got this baseline, and you're like basically saying, okay, I've built this parameter, and I guess at this point, let's just try to go through those phases and start to talk a little bit about that. And how would you transition then if you were going from a work life? I mean, where does the first phase start? I guess where does it hit us?
Well, ideally, you indicated that you are working with clients who are maybe 10 years from retirement. Ideally, they would start to think about these things, and they might even be aware of the four phases well in advance of retiring, because that would give them a tremendous heads up, and a significant head start in kind of making sense of things. But assuming that we don't get the four phases until we get to retirement, phase one is what I call the vacation phase. That's just what it's like. It's you're on vacation every now and then, and you get up when you want, you do what you want, when you want, where you want, if you want. No set routine. We love the fact that there's no routine for a while, because our lives have been dominated by a routine, and so we really value that period of time, which generally tends to last between 1 and 2 years in my experience. For me, it was just about dead on 2 years, but some people go through phase one more quickly, and others, of course, take longer. It's a time for kind of a bucket list checking off, whether these bucket lists have been written down or whether they're just in our heads. We all know that there are some things we want to do when we finally retire, and now we've finally got a chance to do it. So it often involves new golf clubs, or a new sailboat, perhaps, or a new sports car. It often involves a warm weather retreat, perhaps, for people who can get away from it after they finish work. And the interesting thing about phase one is that for most retirees, phase one is, in their view, the ideal retirement. It's cavorting along the beach with a loved one. It's having a glass of wine. It's the cruising. It's all of that stuff. And it's wonderful as long as it lasts. I mean, you've worked hard for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, perhaps. And now it's kind of me time, and it's all about me. And it's a wonderful time as we step back from our day-to-day activities. And I found that at about 2 years, for most people, all of a sudden, too much of a good thing can almost be too much. You can only play so much golf, for example. You can only garden so much, or you can only do whatever it is that you love to do so much. And then we start to ask ourselves, well, is that all there is to retirement? I thought it was supposed to be, doing what I want when I want, and now I'm bored stiff. And at that point, we kind of move from phase one, the vacation phase, into phase two, which is what I call the phase where we feel loss and we feel lost. Many people kind of assume that retirement is going to be a kind of a coast, that we've worked hard all our lives, whether inside the home or outside the home, and there are challenges and there are routines, but we have this sense that when we retire, it's going to be easy sailing. And in fact, retirement has been documented as one of life's top 10 traumas. It's right up there with divorce, with death of a spouse, with moving to a new city or a new country, perhaps. It's up there with a new job. It is a stress-producing event in our lives, and we don't often deal with it in just that way. So in phase two, I've documented that there are 5 significant, almost unavoidable losses that are directly related to retirement. So first of all, we lose our structure. And although we didn't necessarily always love the fact that we were governed by a structure, we find that after a couple of years of no structure, something deep inside us wants and needs a long-term structure. So we miss that structure. That's the first thing that we miss. We miss or we lose our identity at this phase, because many of us, males, I think in particular, although certainly not exclusively, identify with the work that they do. They take it seriously. They want to do the best they can. But when we walk away from that, a piece of us is lost. We also lose some of the relationships that we might have developed over a 40 or 50-year working career. Some of those people that maybe began as work colleagues become really good friends. And when we step away from it, we tend to lose a significant part of that as well. And we lose a sense of purpose. Again, we take our work seriously in most cases. And as we step away, again, another part of us is lost. And finally, the 5th loss that I've associated directly with retirement is, for some people, a loss of a sense of power. Because over a period of time, we can maybe accept some responsibility for personnel or for budgeting. And when we step away, from that, we're just a guy or a gal in the street and nobody cares. And so we suffer these, as I say, 5 significant losses, almost inevitable, that are directly related to retirement. And in phase two, it gets worse. It gets worse because we have to address what I call the 3 Ds. Significant losses that are not directly related to retirement, but more to a time of life. But interestingly, that time of life tends to overlap with retirement. So we suffer, for example, some physical decline, and that silky smooth golf swing that we used to have isn't quite so silky smooth anymore. So there's that kind of physical decline. There's mental decline where we lose our keys more often, or we can't find the remote, or we forget things. So there's that kind of decline as well. Then there's depression. The world famous Mayo Clinic has documented that when you retire, there's a 40% likelihood that you will demonstrate aspects of clinical depression. And then there's divorce, where rates of divorce in North America have skyrocketed for people over 50. It has doubled since 1990. And for folks over 65, it has tripled since 1990. And another fact that is an amazing fact that's tied in with all of this is that the highest rate of suicide in North America today is men over 75. So this phase two, this feeling lost, and these 3 Ds are really a significant time of life. And we don't see these things coming, but we lose all 5 of these losses at essentially the same time because they're directly related to retirement. And it's kind of like, bam, and it can be traumatic. And the result is that we just feel like we're reeling, we're lost. And it's a very, very traumatic time of life. Fortunately, at some point, most of us say to ourselves or a significant other, hey, I can't go on like this. I don't want to spend the rest of my life feeling like this. And in a sense, that's a good thing because it allows us to move forward. As a sidelight, but as a significant sidelight, whereas in 1950, average life expectancy in North America was 68 years, and we could anticipate about 3 years of retirement. Now it is quite likely that baby boomers will live 1/3 of their lives, up to upwards of 30 years. in retirement. And so it becomes more and more significant that we find things in retirement that are meaningful and significant to us. So at some point, as I say, most of us say, I can't go on like this. I've got a long way to go and I've got to do something. And that's when we start to move into phase 3, which is what I call the phase of trial and error. That's when we've kind of reached the low point and we begin to, well, that's when the rehab begins, if I can put it that way. So in phase 3, we start to ask ourselves questions like, what's going to make me want to get up in the morning again? Like, what can I do that's going to make my life significant? How can I contribute? That kind of thing. And when we start asking those questions, that's a good thing because we start to think about options. But what I've also discovered in phase 3 is when I emphasize trial and error, so the things that we might try to break us out of our lethargy and our depression in phase 2 are likely not going to work the first time. So I use examples in my workshops of several situations that I went through in phase 3 where I tried things, they failed miserably. And you got to try something else. And I tried other things and they went miserably. And I use the example of having served on a condo board for a couple of years. Usually people smile when I say that. And I say that I did that until I got tired of being yelled at. And so that didn't work out so well for the longest time. And I could just go on and on with so many things that people try and that don't work. But it's really critical in phase 3 that you keep at it, because the alternative is if you beat your head against the wall and you finally give up in phase 3, what's going to happen? You're going to slip back into phase 2. And there's a greater likelihood of becoming a sad statistic at that point. So I calculate that not everybody, I believe based on the research that I've done, only about 60 to 65% of retirees break through to phase 4. But those who do are some of the happiest people that you will ever lay eyes on. These are people who are basically, they can't wait for the sun to rise in the morning. They've got so many things that they want to get done. And the underlying feature that I've discovered in phase 4, the underlying feature that separates phase 4 people from almost every other phase is a commitment to service to others. It's just that simple. If people undertake providing service to others, whether it's on a voluntary basis, whether it's on a part-time working basis, it doesn't matter. We feel good when we start to provide service to others. So there's a group then that breaks through, but there's work involved. And again, I associate retirement as a time when many people kind of make an assumption that it's going to be easy sailing, and it's not. We need to ask ourselves, I think, 2 or 3 critical questions to break through to phase 4. We need to ask ourselves, what is my purpose here? Why am I here? How can I squeeze all the juice out of retirement? We need to ask those questions. And we need to identify what I call our unique ability. Our unique ability is not something that is necessarily unique to us and no one else in the world, but it's really noting what are the things that, or things that you love to do and that you know you do superbly well. I find people don't think about this generally, but it's an important thing to know as you consider phase 4. The second thing that we need to use and strategies that I use in our workshop, what are some of the highlights of your life? Identify just 5. 5 wins, victories, breakthroughs, call them what you want. You could do 50 if you wanted to, but in our workshops, just do 5. And then we look for common themes. what is the connection between what you do really well and what you love to do and successes? And what people often don't see is that there is a connection, because what you do really well and what you love to do has often led to success in the past. And it will again, if you allow it to, perhaps in an entirely different venue, in a different way of life. But the things you love to do and do really well and have led to success in the past will lead to success again in the future. So you need to think about what those things are, and you need to set aside or set yourself on a path to achieve those things. And what I've found is that people who do are, as I say, the happiest people you will ever lay eyes on. In a nutshell, those are the 4 phases.
Well, that's great. Can we hear me now, guys?
Yep, we got you.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you can tell Raiden and I have been doing this podcast long enough that if I have a question, he probably has the same question, and he's able to step right in when technology fails us.
Yeah.
Because that was my question. What are the 4 phases? And if I could, Riley, if I could sum it up, phase 1 is what everyone thinks retirement should be, right? Let's go travel. Let's go do the things that we've been putting off. But what you're saying is it's not a lifelong phase, and eventually we do get bored of that, and we
Yep.
start to kind of question ourselves, and that's where issues could come up in phase 2
Yep.
of, well, how is the rest of my life going to play out, and what is my or starting to feel that loss of, I was this in my career and now I'm not this. I don't have this power that I used to have. I don't feel the sense of purpose that I had to go get up and do my job and, make my company better or make the people around me better. Um, and then so if you make it out of that phase, then you got phase 3, which is, well, I guess the only way out of that phase is to go start questioning, well, what do I want my life to be? And what is my new sense of purpose now that I'm not tied to a 9 to 5 type of deal? And then
you can rely on past successes to guide you in that regard too.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a blank slate. For most people, I find that it's not, but it doesn't have to be.
And then phase 4 is you've thought it through, you've figured it out, and a lot of times it's the happiness that most people think retirement should be, but you associate it with the idea of helping others or finding that purpose, whether it's helping others outside of family, or could it be as simple as feeling that value needed of just being like a grandparent to, raising children and all that stuff?
Absolutely. To be the best grandparent that you can be, to mentor a kid, to volunteer, perhaps on a condo board, perhaps volunteer to all kinds of charities. They need help desperately, and they're looking for people who have got expertise and have had success in the past. They just fall all over themselves when someone like that shows up and volunteers to offer, or sorry, volunteers to help them.
Right. Yeah. So my question to you, Riley, is it seems like it would be so nice to kind of make the phases work for us, and if we knew what we're getting into before we actually retired. Way too often we will ask someone, what do you want out of retirement? What are you going to do when you retire? And the common response is, I'm too busy to think about that now. I'll figure it out when I get there.
Yep.
And from what I'm hearing, maybe we should start figuring it out before we get there so that we can make the transition as smooth as possible. The other one I hear, which you did touch on, is you could have one spouse that travels a lot or works a certain schedule, and the other maybe not so much. And then once they both retire, they're having to figure out how to live together again all day, every day, versus, the jobs keeping them busy and their interaction being limited throughout the weeks.
Yep.
So it sounds like you've got these workshops that you keep mentioning. Is the workshop to help people understand the 4 phases, and then also how to, maybe streamline them and make them work to their benefit the best way possible, and maybe shorten that phase number 2?
Absolutely. It is, first of all, to introduce the 4 phases so that people have that framework, which I have found people find really helpful. I certainly did, because I make better sense of things when I can see a framework. That's the first thing. But the second thing is to help them work through with some of the strategies that I've outlined, to help them to consider things that they may not have considered before, like what is their unique ability, what do they love to do, and what do they do really well, and look at past successes, all of that kind of thing. I hope is helpful to people, because I would love to raise that percentage of people who get to phase 4 from what I believe to be about 60 or 65 to a much higher level, if at all possible.
So, when in your book, I'm just curious about this one, because I see the point here. You talk about the life legacy letter. Could you
Yeah.
just describe that for us a little bit?
Yeah, sure. The life legacy letter is a strategy that that some people, I included, have found extremely helpful. I think most of us would agree that when we go back beyond just probably a couple of generations, most of us know very little about our family. And to the extent that that may be important to you, I suggest that people consider that life legacy letter, which can be a form of family history. It can be memoirs. It can be whatever you want it to be. But what I've attempted to do in the life legacy letter that I continue to work on is to provide some suggestions, some failures that I've encountered that maybe my grandchildren or children, great grandchildren perhaps, could learn from, maybe. To help them to identify some of the things that are their great strengths, because again, we often don't think about that. So it can take many different formats, and it can be in a written format, it can be in a video format, audio format, it can be, or a combination of all of them. But I have found that for a lot of people for whom that kind of family history is of some significance, it can be a very satisfying thing to leave behind as a legacy when we pass on.
Very nice. Well, you've shared a lot, and you've got the book that you wrote, The 4 Phases of Retirement. I have bought a bunch of those books, and they're on their way. And I'll just tell you this: if you're listening and you're thinking you'd like to get a copy, we are happy to give you a copy as a gift. So if you reach out to us here at the office, we would make sure that you can get a copy if you would like. And we are going to try to work to see if we can't orchestrate a workshop with you, Riley, to maybe go into this in more detail. So this is like, I tell you, we hear this all the time, and it's just so nice to have somebody just walk you through, because I think what's also very unique is that you're doing this not only from this idea of working in financial services, but also living it. So you've kind of lived through those phases yourself, and I think that makes it super powerful.
Yeah. I just hadn't identified them at that time.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming on and talking with us.
My pleasure, Aidan. Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, if you do have questions and you want to reach out to us and you are wanting to talk about this, you can go to our website, pomwealth.net, go to the top right-hand corner, click on schedule call, or you can just reach out to the office and we'll get you a copy of the book. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you again next week.
We hope this video has given you some confidence and clarity as you plan for a worry-free life in retirement. But what else do you need? We have created a complimentary video course called 3 Keys to Secure Your Retirement. This video walks you through step-by-step what you need to do to get ready for retirement. You can also check out our podcast called Secure Your Retirement. You can subscribe below.
For more retirement tips, check out these videos. Also, if you find them valuable, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a like.